Today we're taking a look at the latest on superstar Patrik Laine, where he may end up. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of articles discussing a trade with the Carolina Hurricanes. Tonight we're going to take a look at what that would look like and if it would work for both sides. And that's coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, of course, as we know, Patrik Laine is a player that's been surrounded by a ton of rumors really for quite some time now, ever since it became public that he would prefer a trade and a change of scenery out of Winnipeg. We had comments from his agents this past offseason indicating that they felt it was best for both sides to kind of go their separate ways and for Laine to be moved along to another franchise. So, until something happens, there's bound to be a ton of talk around this player. He came into training camp, looked like, at first he wasn't really, probably to say a little awkward, wasn't really sure about handling the media and all that, but he's responded quite well with some really strong play so far in the first few games. Unfortunately, he's now dealing with an injury and will miss the game that they have scheduled against the Maple Leafs later this evening. So that's not good news on his front, but he has played well so far, picking up the pace in the goal department, even getting a little bit more physical. I thought his two-way play was better. So overall, I think Laine's come into the season looking pretty solid. So if anything, I think he'll have a monster season and produce a lot for Winnipeg, which is only going to increase his value. And if a trade's going to happen, it'll increase the likelihood of there being more interest in getting a better return for Winnipeg. So it very well could be in everybody's best interest that this be a really solid, strong year for Laine, regardless of what happens. Now, as I've mentioned, we've seen reports about different teams having a lot of interest in the Finnish superstar. We've talked a lot about Columbus being a potential destination and swapping him and Dubois, both in situations that they don't want to be in. And they certainly are the types of players that each team is looking for. So that is a real possibility that could be something that they discuss further at some point later in the year. But the team of the Carolina Hurricanes has been mentioned a lot, and I've seen numerous articles here lately suggesting that these two teams have certainly had some discussions and that they very well could make excellent trade partners moving forward. Now, the rumored package that was at least briefly discussed before included the Hurricanes sending Vincent Trocheck as a center iceman to Winnipeg and defenseman Brett Pesce. Now, of course, there was also rumored that the Jets were pushing for youngster Martin Necas over Trocheck, but I think it sounds more like Carolina was countering with an option of Trocheck being in there as well. So I personally think this would be a pretty good trade package myself. If you take a look at the logistics here, Patrik Laine is going to be looking for a big-time contract. Obviously, the Jets may have a hard time squeezing that in. Of course, taking back two salaries like Trocheck and Pesce very well might be tricky for them as well, but at the same time, it allows them to kind of round out their lineup more. They get themselves a really solid number two center, Vincent Trocheck, and they get themselves a really, really steady two-way defender in Brett Pesce, somebody who can really play well in his own end, and certainly a defenseman, I think, that doesn't always quite get as much recognition as he deserves. Now, if you're the Carolina Hurricanes, you're not too concerned about replacing Vincent Trocheck. If you keep Martin Necas in your lineup, I do think longer term, he has that strong potential to be a number two center. And you also have Dougie Hamilton, another top right shot defenseman that you're going to have to pay big bucks for because he's on an expiring contract as well. And you may not have and you may find it challenging to give him his money, pay him properly, and hang on to all your other defensemen as well. So as much as they probably would prefer not to move a guy like Pesce, it might be something that might become necessary if they want to keep Hamilton, and they also have the option here, of course, in a deal like this to bring in a sniper like Laine. And of course, we know with the previous connection with other Finnish players on the team like Sebastian Aho, so I don't think there would be any issues with chemistry. Clearly, they've got a pretty solid top six now. Can you imagine mixing in a guy like Laine as well? This team would be really stacked with a lot of young talent. Would he be even that much more lethal? So I think there is some value there that both sides would certainly have an invested interest to consider this type of trade. And it's not something I think is going to materialize really quick. The situation with Laine and the Jets right now seems to be pretty kosher. Like they're not really, uncomfortable at this point. Like we've seen some awkwardness between Pierre-Luc Dubois and Columbus. I think it's fair to say that Dubois hasn't really had his best play. Looks a little bit uninspired in my opinion. Today's game against the Red Wings, he did pick up his play later in the game and get his first goal. But still, I don't know. I mean, there just seems to be some tension there in Columbus, and that's a situation I can see boiling over sooner than later. Whereas this Winnipeg situation is different. I mean, I'm not really sure that the Jets really need to rush here. So I'm not really sure that we're going to see a Laine trade in season. If it doesn't happen in season, I think there's a pretty decent possibility that it happens either at the draft or in the offseason. And that, to me, would be the prime time. Clearly, he's going to be a pending RFA again, needs a new contract. So I think if it's going to happen, it's going to happen before that next contract comes due, and teams are not going to be wanting to wait around too long into the offseason to get their hands on this kind of player, because he's going to be expensive to get paid and get signed to, at the very least, a shorter term, if not preferably a longer term contract. So the Carolina Hurricanes are a team that I think is certainly one to watch for sure. They're already a pretty good hockey team. They've had some good playoff runs here in the last couple of years, making some noise after getting the change in ownership and coaching and all that. Like, they've done pretty well the last few years. It's time for them to take some steps forward, and they're well on their way to doing that. Now that their goaltending situation, at least from a long-term perspective, doesn't seem to be quite settled yet, and they probably want to leave themselves some flexibility that way. But in my opinion, the Carolina Hurricanes do make an excellent trading partner here for the Winnipeg Jets, and they could accomplish a couple of things here. I think Winnipeg is not going to let Laine go without having a really solid number 2 center option and a top 4 defenseman in the mix. You're probably looking at other pieces as well. There'd either have to be either another roster player, another decent prospect, maybe a first-round pick. I mean, Laine's a second overall pick, 40-goal scorer. He's not going to come cheap by any means, but the Carolina Hurricanes do have the necessary assets to pull off that kind of trade. I don't think there's a ton of other teams that can really do it. I mean, at one point he was linked to Montreal, but given all the moves that they've made, I'm not really sure that's an option anymore. Yes, Laine would still be an upgrade over some of the guys they have there on the wing, of course, but they don't have the flexibility that they used to. So I wouldn't rule it out, but I would think that it's a lot less likely than it used to be. And I know the Philadelphia Flyers are another team that gets brought up and mentioned a lot in Laine conversations, and they're certainly a team as well that have shown a ton of interest. I think Columbus you can throw into the mix there as well. Of course, like I said, with the Dubois situation, there certainly is a connection there that makes sense. I also would not rule out the teams in California when looking for a Patrik Laine trade as well. I mean, there's certainly some teams there, like the LA Kings, for example. If they really want to move things forward and bring in a top player like that, they have a ton of great prospects and younger players that might be very interesting to Winnipeg. Of course, the other thing to keep in mind as well is Winnipeg did also draft Cole Perfetti recently. Not to say that he's for sure going to be a center, but he could be that number 2 center down the road as well. Maybe the LA Kings, if you look at them, would be willing to include a guy like a Gabe Vilardi, for example, who is really a player drafted with a ton of potential, got slowed down by injuries, but is finally back and playing and looking pretty decent. So they might very well get a guy like that. I know there was even some talk about a guy like Byfield being included. And, maybe, I'm not sure that LA would really want to go there. I would think they would view Byfield right now as an untouchable. But Laine's a pretty important, kind of special kind of player, like I said as well, that you don't get very many opportunities to really, acquire very often. So they very well might be willing to talk there. The Kings are so deep with the prospects, it's pretty crazy. Even looking at teams like Anaheim as well. The Sharks, on the other hand, they could use a Laine, but they don't really have the assets, in my opinion, to make the acquisition. The Ducks, though, are another team that you could consider as well. They do have some interesting pieces there, but LA, again, given the vast amount of prospects and deep options that they have, would also be another stealth team to watch in the Laine trade sweepstakes that we will see. Now, I did make a prediction that the Laine trade would be something that we see happen later this year. I'm not sure if it's going to happen by the trade deadline, but I think this is more than likely the kind of trade that would be prime for the 2021 NHL draft. Hopefully by the time we reach that point, they're able to have the draft with actual fans and do a normal draft in person instead of the virtual draft that they had to do for 2020. So let me know what your thoughts are on a potential Laine Hurricanes trade or any other of the teams that we talked about here today. Where do you think is the best fit? Give me your mock trades down below. Maybe we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.